What is primordial soup? To begin with, we have to start at the beginning. To begin of anything, you have to start at the beginning. Primordial soup is a nutrient-rich solution that is comprised of all building blocks of life. That means proteins, amino acids, and the carbon element, and some potential water. The basic building solutions of life. Right? This is basically what is theorized, not proven, but theorized, the goo that all life came from. So when did this sort of come up? Well, next time I have a podium? Okay, next time I will have a podium. When did this come about? Well, potentially 4 to 5 billion years ago, some longer, some shorter. It's roughly in the billions of years, so at a certain point, 4 to 5 billion is really kind of super close to each other in the grand scale of things. So, how did it get here? Well, some say it just happened as space coalesced and came together. Others say it was an asteroid that plowed deep into the surface and left a deposit within the planet that was able to spark life. So that's where potentially this primordial soup came from. What it looked like, yeah, I do have slides. Is it not showing? Okay, now we have to define our endpoint. So if we started at the beginning, we have to go to what we have to define our ending. So, what is the goo? The goo is an organic catalyst that can help develop life. There's only one half of a potential organic catalytic reaction. When the two organic catalysts meet, it can potentially develop life. It is also an organic solution comprised of amino acids, proteins, and other genetic information carriers. So all of our genetic material and our information, the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, the pigmentation of our skin, all of our being is potentially carried through and is only partially mixed with another organic catalyst to help develop life. That's why some people look more like their mother over their father, or the neighbor more than the father or the mom. It just depends upon what has more dominant and recessive genes. That's a little bit outside the scope of what we're going on for today, but let's carry on. So while this does have the possibility of helping create life, it doesn't always, because most of the time it can be found at the confines of a long-forgotten sock at the bottom of the average Twitch viewer's hamper. So, not necessarily an organic catalyst every time, but it has that ability to be. There is several different religious factions that have issues with any of this information. Again, outside the scope of what we're going for today, but just know that some people are really uptight about where this organic catalyst is placed. Okay, so how did we get here? Well, life finds a way, to borrow from Dr. Malcolm. It found a way out of that primordial soup through the evolution of small microbes to atoms to everything. Potentially began in that primordial soup. And the life forms that did develop out of that are not actually what we would think of as life. Some of the earliest ones were single-celled organisms who then began to coalesce and become bigger and more complex. They would spread, they would evolve, survival of the fittest, taking on higher and higher genetic plateaus. So they would be stuck at a plateau for a little while through evolution, genetic change, and drift and modification. This would enable them to eventually adapt to wherever they were at in their current time, not only location, but also in their place chronologically or through time. So, as things developed, the Earth, surface of the Earth became more filled with oxygen. It developed an atmosphere which allowed the sun, the deadly laser, to be avoided, which enabled life to crawl up onto the land, much like we all crawl home after a great night out. So, as time gone on, life did get more complex. They were able to generate oxygen. They were able to breathe that oxygen. They were able to form respiration, reproduction, not just through mitosis, but also through a sexual dimorphism. So life got more complex. As we all very well know, life got extremely complex. So it started out with some reptilians, some dinosaurs, then eventually mammals. Through time, the different eras and the different branches of animal life on Earth went through reptilians, then dinosaurs, then mammals. At one point, they were all together. Then through a series of astronomical events, the dinosaurs were wiped out, leaving a lot more reptilians, mammals, fish, anthropods, and then there were some birds that eventually did get to survive as well. What we are going to focus on mostly is the mammals. So they eventually began to diversify, and eventually came the rise of the simians. So it is theorized, again, this is all theory, no one was there, no one can absolutely 1000% confirm it, but simians were one of our first great ancestors. So we get to thank them for all of our traits. So let's talk about who the simians are. Again, they're our ancient ancestors, and some may look still deceptively close to what you might see in a zoo. Think chimpanzees, baboons, gorillas, that sort of thing. They have changed over time, as you can see through this illustration. They changed, and they changed, and they grew taller and smarter. We'll continue to talk about that here in a little bit. Originally, when they started, simians lived a lot more in trees. They developed and they stayed away from the ground. Because let's be honest, when there's giant titanoboas and dinosaurs and giant reptiles, staying off the ground generally tends to be a good idea. Crocodilies is also a good one. Staying off the ground, great idea. There's vegetation up there that can keep you cool in long summer days. It's easier to stay away from dangers up on the ground. You're not getting stepped on by something vastly bigger than you. And through that vegetation, you might also find food, whether that be organic vegetables and fruits, or that might be bugs that have inhabited in trees. They started to live in trees. Can someone explain that to Tylen, what we're doing specifically? You came in the middle of a TED Talk. From the primordial soup to tons of goop. Okay, so as time passed, simians did eventually start to evolve, and their skeletal systems started to get more and more erect. You'll note also through this image that you'll see that they started to move, the chest started to move forward, started to move up, and that began to expand their stature. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did skeletal erection lead to higher thought? Well, as they evolved, their skeletal systems started to shift. They started to stand more erect, shifting the hips to allow standing more upright and rigid. They were no longer on all fours all the time. They were allowed to use, their hands started to become free, right? So they were able to start using different muscles, which eventually led to a bigger brain cavity, which allowed for more ideas and a higher developed brain. So, the species that was formerly Homo erectus continued to change and became Homo sapiens. That's where we are today. Some are theorizing that as we continue through our technological age, that we will actually evolve out of Homo sapiens, but again, that's in a distant future and a different conversations altogether. So, they moved out of trees and allowed to walk upright on the ground. They started to get more ideas, complex thought, and with more ideas became tools, art, and civilization. Civilization is vastly different from what we would think. Think closer to a pack of animals, a pack of Simians, closer to that. Eventually, they would form colonies and small groups and families, or what's sometimes referred to as troops. So, they become culture. So, humankind, that's what they eventually became. They eventually decided that they would communicate through whatever means they could. Now, at this time, there was no clear spoken language, there was no clear written language, but there was the idea of art. You see something, and you put it on a cave wall. That's where we still actually have some cave wall drawings to this day. We are discovering more and more each and every day. So, when you're drawing, what do you draw? Well, there's no way of writing words, no way of coming up with complex ideas. So what do? You start drawing your success. You hunted a buffalo. You hunted a mammoth. You write what you hunted. Maybe you got to take over an enemy's area. You got to hunt their game. Well, you draw their failure. You draw you chasing them off the land, and you're victorious. But the other thing that you also draw, as every artist knows, you also draw your waifu. This is the age and era in which waifus truly came into being. Now, why do you say that? Well, every person knows that as an artist, you draw what draws your eye. It's called a muse. So, many times, not in this specific image, for I do not want to get banned, there are images of cave people interacting in such a manner. Why do they write these things? The idea of filth and degeneracy has not been invented yet. But that's okay, because it is art. Let's be honest, it's art. They are drawing what is happening in their lives. If it were not for this art, we might actually not have any records of what was going on at the time. So in certain areas, you can see, hey, they're drawing a lot of mammoth, they're drawing a lot of buffalo or large game, or they're drawing rivers, or they're drawing one chief, basically, with many, many prospects. Well, that tells us a little bit more about their culture and how it was organized. Maybe they had the idea of, let's have someone in charge of all of us, and naturally he gets all of the prospects. So, culture keeps shifting forward and forward and forward, as things always do. So then we get cultural evolution. We start getting written language, spoken language, the written word. As culture evolves, you get these things. It's no longer feasible just to scratch out an image on a cave wall. You now need to tell someone about the terrible bronze that you bought. You need to tell them, don't buy from this dude. He will sell you terrible bronze. So you write it down through stone tablets, or write it on proto-paper, papyrus, or on skins that you have hunted. You are now writing and communicating, and others are able, if they are educated, to understand that or read that, and are able to tell that going forward. Hence the age of being able to contribute ideas. So, once written language springs forward, what is the first thing that happens? Well, culturally, the first thing that happens is actually fan fiction. No one wants to write about history. If you're writing about history, you're generally being contracted by a king or emperor or whomever is in charge, and you're writing about how cool they are. But many historians may not agree, but ancient religious texts or mythologies all became the first instances of fan fiction. All of the mythologies of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, some would argue that they are some of the first and most well-known fan fictions. People would write different stories. There is nothing, air quotes, canon that happens except for very few events. The events just were written out and said, okay, well, Zeus, he was flying around as a goose, seen someone who caught his fancy, and now we have this god. Which brings me to the last point on this slide is, with fan fiction comes something we now call shipping. It invented ships. We can think of Zeus and Hera as a ship, or Zeus and the peasant girl who caught his eye as a ship. Maybe that peasant girl was based upon that artist's, that writer's interest, their fancy, their crush, as it were. And maybe they were sitting themselves in the position of Zeus. We truly do not know why some of it was written. But ancient religious texts can be considered fan fiction, because not everyone believes them to be canon or correct. So if we label everything as fan fiction, it gets better. Some people hold that as headcanon. So, let's talk a little bit more about ships. What are they? Well, I explained a little bit already. Shipping is the art of pairing one fictional or pseudo-fictional person with another. You could call the Odyssey a ship. So, what is a pseudo-fictional person? Well, maybe it is somebody who actually exists, but you are writing them into the story. Or you are making yourself a character into the story, which would be called a self-insert character. So, those are the characters. You have a self-insert character, and you have a pseudo-fictional person. It could be your neighbor, and you're writing a fan fiction where they get gored by the Minotaur, and you get to be the hero, and now they forever praise you, and they owe you. And what's this? You get to marry his daughter? Well, what do you know about that? Your self-insert character becomes the hero, and many times this is a power fantasy that many fall into. If you go into any sites to read fan fiction, you will see self-inserts and fan service galore. That's not a topic we're going to go super into today, but just know that it is a thing. Zeus and Hera are considered a common ship and are considered to be kind of a canon ship. There's numerous fan fictions that say that Zeus and Hera are together. That becomes closer to canon as you can in fan fiction. But, maybe it's Zeus and somebody else. So, fan fiction that grows in popularity, as we can all attest to today, as it grows in popularity, fan art is created. Oh, wow, that was really cool. Heracles is destroying the Hydra? I think I want to draw some art of that. And that spawns a different form of art. Fan art. It is fanon. You're reading somebody else's fan fiction. You're going, Heracles fighting the Hydra. Heracles and the bull. Okay, I think I want to draw that. Here's how I'm going to draw it. I'm going to draw myself, rippling muscles, a 16-pack. I'm going to draw myself that way, and I'm going to be the one that slayed the Hydra. That is fan art with fan self-insertion. So there you go. That is fan art. Now, there are many rules to art, as any artist can also tell you. You don't mix clashing colors. You don't do anything that is bright. But the one rule that every artist knows, that is the 34th rule of art, is that if something exists, it's probably going to be put into a compromising situation. That's kind of the rules of art. And that is an understood rule of if you write anything, that somebody will make an idea of it, an art of it. You no longer have control 1000% over that property. This happens in a lot of instances where people have written something or they've made a TV show or a movie, and people make these artistic renderings of situations that haven't happened or might not ever happen. So that is really what the idea is. There's that 34th rule. Now, how did we get to the modern era? So, as artists go down through the generations, they pass down the rules of art, and new fan fictions and other fictions arose. So, that happens all the time. It's a generational thing. That the medium has changed. We're no longer scratching on walls. We are no longer scratching things out on papyrus. We're now doing things digitally, or we're manipulating images. And how extreme those situations have also changed. Before, it might have just been a simple stick figure on a cave wall, and I can see it. But now in the modern era, we have more extreme examples of such lascivious actions, which does eventually lead to, as we have put it so kindly, the goo being wasted at the bottom of a Twitch viewer's hamper. This is where we arrive at the modern era. We now have instant fan arts of all of our favorite waifus we've invented. Whether or not they are good art is oftentimes dependent upon how much you are willing to pay an artist to do it. And as that should be. So we started at nothing, started literally the beginning of all things, of talking about primordial soup, and of the primordial sauce, the starting of all things. So now we're asking for the sauce. Some instances and some religions would say that we're wasting the sauce, but who truly knows? In a cosmic scale, 5 billion years, you know what? We're in a area. Again, yeah, agreed. Waifus and husbandos, the counterpart to waifus. That's the era that we find ourselves in today. You can go online and you can ask for an instant fan art of our favorite waifus and our husbandos. And within a week, 2 weeks, you could have that art. So, thanks for coming to my talk on starting in the sauce to asking for the sauce. I hope that was good. It was really educational to me. If a man does not have sauce, then he is lost. Same man can get lost in the sauce. I like it. There you go. That is from the beginning of time to our current era of asking for the sauce. I will now take questions from the audience. Did I cover everything to your satisfaction? Did I miss any points that you'd like me to go back on and talk about? The Epic of Gilgamesh being a fanfiction is not a topic. It is. Ultimately, Epic of Gilgamesh is a fanfiction. Ultimately, a lot of religious texts are. Whether or not people will agree, that's the TBD. So, any questions, concerns, think that I missed a point, didn't speak enough about a point? I will take those questions now.